Cleanfall establishes itself as a rare entity, an imaginative descent into chaos that neither seeks approval nor clarity. It constructs a self-contained world governed by its own peculiar logic, then challenges the player to persist within it, not through mastery, but through intuition, improvisation, and endurance. At the surface level, Cleanfall may appear to be another two-dimensional roguelite, centered around procedural level generation, cyclical death, and iterative improvement. Yet this description quickly dissolves under scrutiny. What Cleanfall actually delivers is a rigorous philosophical experience, where gameplay mechanics are inextricable from the player's subjective discovery of meaning and method. It is a game designed less to be solved than to be survived. Each run feels more like a confrontation with entropy than a structured campaign. The premise is deceptively minimal. The player takes on the role of a robotic cleaner, tasked with descending into the depths of a hostile and bizarre alien planet. Though labeled as a cleaning robot, the protagonist's purpose is shrouded in ambiguity. There is no introductory cutscene, no explanatory dialogue. One simply awakens on the surface of a planet where everything seems to exist in opposition to comprehension. This is not oversight, it is deliberate. Every element in Cleanfall is calculated to place the player in a posture of curiosity and caution. What immediately distinguishes the game from its contemporaries is the use of a singular, multifunctional device, the pulse rifle. Most games diversify the player's tools and weapons over time, creating a sense of linear advancement. Cleanfall subverts this by investing its complexity into one instrument, whose use case shifts dynamically based on the player's ingenuity. The pulse rifle acts as both a weapon and a physical manipulator. It can dig through terrain, repel creatures, pull objects toward the player, and launch projectiles fashioned from the environment itself. What appears to be a conventional shooter becomes, instead, a physics-driven improvisational performance. Mastering the pulse rifle is less about learning combinations or upgrades, and more about interpreting context and responding to physical cause and effect. This versatile tool forms the backbone of every encounter and every descent. The caverns of Cleanfall are filled with volatile interactions. Creatures may behave in neutral, curious, or predatory ways, and their intentions often remain obscure until it is too late. Bioluminescent frogs may hop harmlessly past the player during daylight, only to mutate into aggressive, red-eyed hunters at nightfall. Fungal spores, inert by day, might become explosive hazards when disturbed. The game's ecology is not static, but responds to subtle changes in atmosphere, noise, and time of day. This sense of environmental reactivity transforms the act of traversal into a constant negotiation with uncertainty. In the absence of a map or overarching quest log, progress in Cleanfall becomes inward-facing. The player is motivated not by a visible end goal, but by the constant tension between the known and the unknowable. With each layer descended, new visual motifs emerge, new species arise, and new interactions become possible. The game does not explain these transitions, it offers them as mysteries. The reward for survival is not gear, but insight. This descent is visually and symbolically reinforced through Cleanfall's stunning hand-drawn art style. The surface of the planet is rendered in pastoral greens and soft earth tones, evoking a deceptive tranquility. As one ventures further, these tones give way to darker, more saturated palettes. Cavernous blues, toxic yellows, arterial reds. Every biome feels increasingly alive, even sentient. Cavern walls pulse with biological energy. Distant shadows suggest the movement of colossal beings, and the terrain itself shifts in a way that borders on the organic. The visual style evokes the texture of an oil painting viewed through the lens of a fever dream, where the edges of realism are constantly blurred by the intrusion of surreal elements. Beneath this descent lies a more disturbing undercurrent, the question of purpose. Who is the protagonist? Why is the robot descending? The only consistent figure of authority in the game is a tall, skeletal man in a top hat, an archetype of aristocratic elegance laced with menace. He watches, comments, and offers thin encouragement, but his true motives are left unstated. His presence recalls both the manipulative benefactor and the silent observer. He is the personification of surveillance masquerading as support, and his recurring appearances suggest that the descent is not merely mechanical, but performative. The player is being observed and perhaps judged. Cleanfall never resorts to exposition. Instead, it communicates its themes through symbols, behaviors, and the architecture of its world. There are moments of genuine terror, being pursued through a collapsing tunnel by bioelectric predators, fleeing the glow of hostile eyes emerging from every crevice, or triggering a mysterious consumable that erases an entire biome. The tension of these encounters is amplified by the game's minimalist sound design. Instead of traditional musical cues, Cleanfall relies on ambient noise, distant animal calls, and the rhythmic pulse of subterranean life. Silence becomes its own kind of horror. Survival requires more than combat. Players can purchase and place automated turrets using resources harvested from the environment. These devices, affixed to walls and ceilings, serve as temporary reprieve against the nightly onslaught. But even these defenses are fallible, and their strategic placement becomes a secondary game of territorial control. Some players may choose to construct makeshift bases or flying fortresses using a combination of organic creatures and mechanical platforms. These floating constructs add a layer of verticality to gameplay and allow for mobile defense strategies. Yet their very instability reminds the player that permanence is illusory. Flying bases can drift away or collapse, leaving the player stranded in the dark. The game's progression system is unusually philosophical in its implications. Though it includes standard roguelite mechanics, such as resource accumulation, unlockable upgrades, and character classes, these are never the primary focus. Death is not a failure state, but a return. Upon dying, the player is transported back to the surface by a ghostly train, and from there begins again. With each cycle, the planet changes. Patterns must be relearned. Safe havens become death traps. Items behave differently. This cyclical structure mirrors mythological archetypes of descent and rebirth. Orpheus in the underworld, Dante in the Inferno, the alchemist within the crucible. The player's journey is not a path toward mastery, but toward understanding. This thematic richness is matched by a gameplay depth that reveals itself gradually. The early stages of Cleanfall are disorienting, even alienating. The controls feel imprecise, the interface minimal to a fault. Yet with each run, these same mechanics begin to feel intuitive. The player is not trained by tutorial, but by lived experience. Much like the real world, meaning is constructed rather than given. What once seemed inscrutable becomes familiar. What once evoked dread becomes routine. Until the game changes again. This interplay between comfort and disruption forms the emotional heart of Cleanfall. It does not seek to empower the player in traditional ways. Instead, it demands humility. The further one progresses, the more fragile survival becomes. There is no moment in which one can claim dominance over the world. The planet remains indifferent, its systems opaque. In this way, Cleanfall is not about conquering a hostile environment, but about coexisting with it long enough to glimpse its truth. Yet this approach is not without its challenges. The learning curve is steep, and the lack of guidance may alienate players seeking a more conventional roguelite experience. The interface, though stylistically consistent, can impede fluid navigation of inventory and resource management. Performance may stutter under the weight of layered physics interactions and emergent chaos. These issues, while present, do little to detract from the overall impact of the experience. They are the imperfections of a system designed not for simplicity, but for depth. In a landscape filled with derivative mechanics and familiar aesthetics, Cleanfall dares to be singular. It evokes comparisons, Spelunky for its procedural brutality, Terraria for its exploratory potential, Noita for its emergent systems, but ultimately stands apart. It is a game that resists simplification and thrives in contradiction. It is both beautiful and grotesque, mechanical and organic, deterministic and chaotic. To play Cleanfall is to enter a world without fixed meaning and attempt to leave it with some semblance of coherence. It is a meditation on systems, on survival, on the unknowable. It is not for the impatient, nor for the easily discouraged, but for those willing to submit to its rhythms, to endure its strangeness, and to descend without answers. Cleanfall offers an experience as profound as it is perplexing.